thank you everyone for being here. And I must say it is such an absolute pleasure to be here, and especially with this panel, because you know what we have here today, and I must congratulate Mary for really having curated this to great effect, because what we have here is uh, almost a slice of the book business as we know it, right? So we have an independent book a seller person, we have an agent, a literary agent representative, we have an editor, and we have a children's book editor and the editor of Context, a mainstream publisher. Right? So I'm really hoping that all of you will have questions and that we'll be able to have a fruitful conversation here. So, so I'll start with Ajita, if that's okay. Yeah. So Ajita has been an editor for a really long time, and she's with Context now. That and she's been there for a few years now. And you know, so my first question is going to be, as an editor, Ajita, uh, we all the editor does this really mysterious job, because an editor's all over a book, right? Every page, every sentence, every word has the editor's imprint, but at the same time your presence is completely concealed. You are only noticed if there's a if there's a glitch. You should not be noticed. So can you tell us a little bit about the business of editing? What goes into it, right?
Right. So actually, it's like you said, the role is meant to be invisible, and at the best of all times, it is very much so. Um, there are two sides to editing. One part of it is commissioning, which is um, so for our house Context is part of Westland. We have these commissioning meetings where we discuss the book with like the whole editorial team with sales and marketing, and we talk about proposals that we get. That say Kanishka sends us a proposal, and I will look at it and I say, yeah, I really like this and I really want to do it, and then I make a pitch for it in house. So at that level, I'm kind of representing the writer for my house. I'm telling them why we should try to acquire that particular writer. So that is one part of publishing. We actually published Peace Has Come, Parismita's book, which is one of my very favorite books in Context. Um, and the other part of it, of course, is the copy editing. Um, uh, which again has two parts. You look at a book and sometimes you feel that perhaps if the author were to think about the book just a little bit differently, the structure could be just a little more, it could be a little tighter, perhaps part 3 should actually be part of part 1 and part 2 should flow after that whole thing. So you have those kinds of discussions, or in fiction you feel that this character, it he's not quite so convincing because there is either like cultural rootedness isn't right, or there is some kind of um, there's some way in which the plot isn't holding together, or you feel that the ending could be in some sense like stronger. That is one kind of editing. Once the editor and the commissioning editor and the author are happy with the shape of the book, it goes into copy editing. There's typically a copy editing team in a publishing house, but quite often, in Context, me and my co-editor Kartika, we tend to copy edit most of our books. Um, but there is typically also a copy editing team in a publishing house. So that is sort of the whole sort of arc of the editorial department. Not the entire arc. I mean, then there's like proofreading, and there's like after that, it gets typeset, then it goes into proofreading, then like there are various checks. So there is a whole lot of other stuff that happens, but this is basically what an editor does.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much, Ajita. And as I said, so what we are going to have is really a snapshot of the work we do. But I think that was really done so effectively. Thank you so much. So I think now it will make sense for me to move to Kanishka, perhaps, right? So as he's been introduced, he's a literary representative, and he's had a particularly successful run this year. Isn't that right? With the prize list. Yeah, so he's had a couple of interesting years, a couple of very successful years. So, so what I'd like to ask you is, of course, tell us a little bit about the process, what it is really that a literary agent does, and also I'd also like to mention here that Kanishka is also a writer. So he's a writer who was a writer first, and then is that right?
Yeah, so this whole idea to start an agency was born out of my own disillusionment at not finding a good enough support system, because I started writing in 2002, and at the time there were no agents, there were no festivals where authors could meet prospective editors, and even like well-known authors in person. There were like one or two Indian agencies, and we did not have the number of publishing houses that we have now. We had like Penguin, Harper, and Rupa. So it was very difficult to get access to publishers. But more importantly, it was difficult to get honest feedback on your books. I mean,
Yes, I
so
can
that's
see
one of the
that.
reasons why I started Writer's Side. It was started as an assessment service. We were critiquing manuscripts. We were a group of editors who were helping uh, writers hone their books, but we were not agents till 2010, when I discovered Anis Salim. And then I signed him on, and then, I mean, he's gone on to win also, like, practically every single prize in India, including the Sahitya Academy Award. uh, One drawback of agenting has been that it has been a big blow to my own writerly ego. So even if I like end up writing good things and I find good publishers, I'm just like so reluctant to publish the books, because because of that whole label of being an agent. So
Wow, that's really
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
So writing led me to agenting, and agenting has like destroyed my writerly egos so far. So that's the story behind how, I mean, I started the agency. Um, should I talk about the role of an agent?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Good.
So a literary agent acts as a bridge between uh, writers, promising writers and publishers. We identify good manuscripts, works of literature, both fiction and non-fiction. We edit, hone, develop them, and then we find the right editor, publisher, and the right financial deal for authors. The role of an agent is not restricted to just reading, editing. It's a very business-oriented role. There's a lots of negotiation that take place, lots of back and forth contracts, especially if a very promising book or a very major book is involved, and everybody wants to publish it. You have to participate in auctions. You have to get so many different departments of the publishing house involved when a big book is involved, or if like many people want to like publish a book. So we look at contracts. We um, uh, give advice to authors on the things to look out for in a publishing house, because of our vast experience. Another thing that a agent has to do is to pitch a book to the right editor, because uh, we have 5 or 6 MNCs, multinational publishing houses in India. Many of them have several commissioning editors who are commissioning into different genres. So you have to find the right match for an author, and just not just randomly pitch it to your point of contact in a publishing house. You have to be constantly in touch with all the editors and all the publishing houses, ask them what they're looking for, and then find the right fit of the book for them. Um, so these days, because of the explosion of OTT platforms, Netflix, Amazon, agents are also expected to exploit subsidiary rights to, works of fiction and non-fiction represented by them. So we actively pitch to Netflix, Amazon. We have these audio book companies that have come up in India, Storytel, Audible. So you have to exploit rights and generate income, multiple streams of income for your author in return for a commission. So we work on a commission model. It's like whatever the author gets, all the earnings, including the advance and the future royalties, once that sum of advance has been recovered, we get a percentage of that. So we don't make any money till such time A, the author uh, gets an offer, and B, the author accepts the offer. I mean, nobody can force an author to accept an offer or work with the publishing house or an editor he or she is not comfortable with. So I would say we are like literary managers, and editing, reading is a very very small part of our business or our profession. We have to like do multiple things like get lawyers involved sometimes, get involved with the marketing, publishing. I have to pitch my authors to festivals. I have to get involved in securing blurbs for my authors. So it's a 360-degree approach.
That really looks like a lot of work. I mean,
A lot of work, but it will pay off. It takes years to pay off. I mean, you cannot expect to like make millions in the first or the second year of agenting. But I've been doing this for 10 or 11 years, and now it's paying off.
Okay.
I mean, I don't do anything else.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, but that's really and thank you. I mean, because I think that's sort of in the time that we have, you've really been able to give us a very effective picture of all the work that actually goes into making these books available at our
so
because that's the
there's
process.
another thing. So agenting globally has been a very old phenomenon. It's like as old as publishing in the UK and the US, which is why many of the agencies in the UK and US are so big, because they are handling estates of writers who have sold in like hundreds and millions of copies. But in India, agenting is only 10 or 11 years old.
Right.
And there's another very peculiar problem, complication when it comes to agenting in India, is that our own buyers sometimes end up being our competitors, because authors have access to publishers directly. So, and that makes the role of a dormant agent redundant. But if you are, providing a lot of services, if you are dynamic, if you are adding things that an author cannot do on his own, then even the most well-known writers, known to everyone in publishing and vice versa, they will come to you.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, that's really, really. I mean, there's so much. I mean, I've published a few books, but there's so much I didn't know. So thanks for that. And we'll just move to Bijal now, and and now we'll shift things a little bit because we are talking about books. But even within the books business, I think children's books follows a slightly different model. And especially, I'm so happy that we have Bijal here, because the model that Pratham Books, that she's a commissioning editor for, because their model, in the last few years, I found to be even more exceptional than a lot of the trade publishing that is going on. So first of all, again, I'd like to ask Bijal about the business of being a commissioning editor for children's books, right? And what goes into it, and also perhaps you can tell us, you can focus a little bit on the kind of books that you've been encouraging in terms of representation, how you're trying to undergo what I'm going to term like a bit of a shift in perspective of children's books. Yes, so if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Firstly, so at Pratham Books, we work with a very, very single-minded mission in mind. It's to get a book in every child's hand, which basically means that our books need to be affordable. That means that a child who's from an underserved community should be able to have access to these books, and they should be available across the country in whatever form a child needs to read. So my job's very exciting because I strongly believe that every time a child opens a book, that book offers the child a space to imagine new worlds, to understand their own reality. And we do it with very little words and pictures, because I work with picture books. So typically, Ajita, your manuscripts would be what, how many words? So anything from 60,000 to 3 lakh words. Our word count on an average is 449 words. So which means that you're working with an author to distill an emotion, whether it's a complex emotion of grief, whether it's a emotion of happiness, but you're basically taking that big emotion and are working with the author to bring it down to the bare minimum so that the child finds it easy to read and also to keep the page turning. So similarly, like what Ajita said, we have the ideation process, and then we decide one of the main things that we also try to consider is who's telling the story. And I'll come to that a little later. But once we have the manuscript in, there's a pretty intense editing process where we call ourselves scissor hands because we're constantly chopping text. And then the most exciting bit also is that it goes to an illustrator. So you pair the manuscript to the words to an illustrator who'll be able to give it the wings it needs. For instance, is it going to be something that's a dark and monochromatic landscape, or is it going to be colorful and full of life, or are we going to look at lino cuts? So we look at different formats. Are we going to look at indigenous art to tell the story? And then the magic starts to happen because the illustrator, the picture book is a partnership of 50% of the author and 50% of the illustrator. And so you bring these two powerhouses together and you suddenly have this beautiful work of art which is meant to get children to imagine things. Typically, it takes us about a year to create a full picture book, so it's that long a process. One of the things that you were asking about, we've been also trying to do is that we spoke about this in the morning panel, that it's very important for a child to be able to see themselves in the books they read. We grew up with Enid Blytons, and all we knew was scones and picnics in moors. I had no idea what those were. But now we have access to wonderful writers and illustrators who can place and situate the stories in our own context, which means that we're trying to get contemporary writers and illustrators from the Northeast region a lot because we want to tell contemporary stories from here. We're trying to get more minority community writers and illustrators to tell their stories, which also means that we have to be mindful and respectful of their voices and how we frame that. So yeah, picture books is very exciting according to me.
Yeah, so thank you. And I'm so glad we've sort of been able to speak about that, and that Bijal is actively looking out for artists and writers from the Northeast. So those of you who know of, who have friends or who are personally interested, you should really consider putting in a pitch, right? So thank you for that. And so now all this work, the exciting work that we're doing with books, right? So we have the children's books, we have the classics and the literary fiction, and the prize-winning successfully agented books. But none of it is actually, but none of this is going to really make any sense. Like none of this is going to come together if we don't move to like the next person that I'm going to be speaking to, which is Raman here, Raman Shrestha, who has been running a very successful and innovative bookshop in Sikkim called Rachna Books. And it's really been a game changer in so many ways. And he's been a champion of bookshops and has also started a publishing venture within Rachna Books, right? And yes, so another person to pitch to, perhaps. And so the first question I'm going to ask is basically taking off from a very interesting conversation we had this morning, where Raman came up with this formulation that really stole all our hearts, which is that he was speaking of the bookseller's instinct, right? So how do these booksellers curate? Because every bookshop you go to, it has a different imprint, isn't it? Every bookshop. So the curation of the bookshops. So he used the term the bookseller's instinct. And there was another wonderful term he's used, which was the algorithm of the heart. So maybe he could tell us about his job as a bookseller as well as reflect a little bit on these wonderful formulations he's had.
Well, we keep hearing about new books coming in all the time, and it's that's the way. I mean, the curation always instinctively goes to what books might be coming, but over a period of time, you realize that sometimes you have books in your store, and sometimes the shelves are empty, and then again you curate, you based on your experience. It's like it's not no mathematical binary figures will tell you what's going on. It's like as if the bookshop is breathing in books and breathing out books. It's always like so. Sometimes when somebody enters a bookshop, they might see, oh, your shop's a little empty-ish. That's when the books have breathed out into the world. So that's and our job is constantly to keep that process going. And I've been lucky to be doing this for so many years, and the industry. I mean, we're always forward-looking. We're always looking for the next big thing, which is going to be the next big book. We always remind people that there are books which have brought us here, which have brought us this far, and we are always looking at the back and mid lists. And it's as if we are looking back with nostalgia. The way people think bookshops, uh, I mean, they always connect bookshop with some nostalgia, with some level of quaintness. So that we do by curating, and that's where the curation comes in. That's how we select our books. Books with our own experience, we know how much, which ones have sold, and yeah, that's the way it has been. It's a very natural, organic process for us.
Yeah,
It's
and-
you know, it's based on our lived experience.
And so, I mean, talking of lived experience, we've just gone through a pandemic, which has, of course, been devastating for all of us, like in all the sectors. But I would imagine that bookshops took a hard hit. So, how did you negotiate the pandemic as Rachna Books?
Well, social media definitely helped. We started. I mean, we couldn't go and reach out to new books, but what stock we already had. So it was like there was this barrier where people were itching to get their hands on some books, and there we were. So we started communicating. So I was walking wherever I could walk to deliver books.
The containment zones
I was
sometimes?
driving
Yeah.
into the heart of containment zones and buildings after buildings with that tape and no soul in sight. There I was going and delivering books, and I mean, that's what that's what you do.
Yeah,
You
and-
bring books. So all the process of writing, editing, like you mentioned, the bookshop is the final frontier from where the books, all that work that has gone, the whole industry, that all the work that has gone, it jumps into the hands of the reader, and there we are passing that baton on. That's how I mean, I see I mean, it's like a very romantic way of looking at what I do, but
Yeah.
that's the way I look at it, and that's how I enjoy my days every
Yeah.
day.
Because along with the Excel sheets that you spoke of,
Yeah.
you also need the romance. So,
Yes, you do.
Yeah, so thank
I
you
mean,
for that.
passion
Yeah.
runs the game. You don't run a bookshop with numbers. You need to have the passion for it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, right? I think that's one thing that unites, like the work that all of you are doing. That at the base of it, there is the passion to get the book out, to sell it, to get the Netflix deal, to have that child take that book, and so on. Um, Right. So, in fact, one of the things that struck me, Ajita, when I was looking at the bios, is that you spoke of context. The imprint that you're looking at, and you spoke about how you are you're looking at politically charged books. And I was a little taken aback by. I mean, I was a little surprised, pleasantly. So I was pleasantly surprised by that, because from what one sees in the publishing industry with many of the big publishing houses, it's sort of just going on to Bollywood biographies or revisionist histories. I mean, there is nothing wrong with that, but they seem to be taking up disproportionate space. So what is it? What are the implications of having a politically charged imprint in these times?
So, to begin with, of course, the larger house, we do all those books. We do the big, like, business memoir, the film books, like, we do the whole range of every kind of book. But when Kartika and I were thinking about what we wanted to do with context, what we wanted to do was really curation. And I think it was a coming together of similar instincts with both of us, that we're both political animals, and just the kind of books that we are naturally drawn to. um, when we're thinking beyond numbers, when we're thinking of what we really want to do, what we want people to read, I think our instinct is to, I mean, our natural way of engaging with the world is political. Mine certainly is very, 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 like, highly political.
So what are the books? Or
So,
something?
so when I say that context is a politically charged imprint, I don't mean that it is my politics. I mean that it is written by authors who've thought their politics through very deeply. Who are engaging with, like Peace Has Come. When you look at that book, you know that it's really like rooted in having understood a region. It it's it's talking about a place where there is conflict, but there is life happening, through the conflict. It's not like that is the only thing that defines life in a place where there is conflict, or a time when there is conflict. There are people falling in love, there are hearts being broken, there are houses to be run, there's food to be earned, there's all of that happening. That's very political, you know. Um, it doesn't have to be like Kapil Komireddy's book, Malevolent Republic. Now that was a polemic. That is very obviously political, But it doesn't have to be that. It could be Kin Phom's book, which is where he's saying, I really feel that Khasi history is just passing out of Khasi land. Like, in Meghalaya today, there isn't that sense of who the Khasis are because we're forgetting our stories. And so I want to put together these stories. I want to research this mythology. So that is also a political act, Josie Joseph's The Silent Coup, where he's looking at how, the non-military branch of, investigative agencies, the tax department, what are these what are these institutions doing to the spirit of the Constitution, to our democracy, And I feel we live in a time where these questions are all very urgent. We find our Constitution, imperiled. We find conflict of various kinds, um, you know, popping up across the land. And in a time like this, everything you look at, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, anything that you engage with is automatically political. And I think that is how context is political, because we're very engaged with India, we're very engaged with the world, and with the way we're living today. And I think that's how we're political.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Ajita, because that really, I think, sets the stage for my next question as well, which will be to Bijal, because this whole idea of of being political, and so the politics around us. The one thing that we can't ignore is the climate, right? And ecology, and that I know is a concern that is very close for to Bijal, not just as an editor, where I think this is a concern as an editor, but also as a writer. She's also written children's books which look at a lot of the challenges of ecology. So can we have some reflections on what it means to balance these two roles of an editor and a writer, as well as how all of this sort of comes together, I sense, through your concerns with ecology and the climate?
Wow, that's a big question. Firstly, everyone should know Kanishka is my agent. So actually, I think I was his first children's book author, and yeah. I think as the editor in me is constantly telling me that there are lots of stories to be told, and there are better people to tell the story, and my job is to find them, find the people, and help them tell their stories in many ways. When it comes to climate change, I think I've said this so many times now, but um, we're at a point in history that we just cannot ignore this. Our children are going to they are turning around and telling us, you're messing with our future, because honestly, we're all old. We've seen a lot of things. We've seen the weather turn. We've seen the climate change, and yet we are seeing there's very little action, and that's a very frustrating space to be in. And what literature kind of does for me, especially children's literature, it brings together science with stories, which offers children a space to understand complex topics like climate change. And the fact is that we are the ones who learned science when we were in school. Children are learning science right now. So when you talk to them about the atmosphere, you talk to them about greenhouse gases, you talk to them about mining, you talk to them about all of these things that are happening in this world right now, they understand it because they're learning it. And they're curious as to how is this all changing, because they're witnessing it. So I constantly go into classrooms now, and there'll be children who come there because they want to talk about the smog pollution in Delhi and how it has impacted their daily lives. Like one boy came and said, "I'm here because, um, ma'am, my parents took me out of the city because it was so polluted, and I just missed my friends. I missed my home, and is this what is going to be my future?" And it's such an earth-shattering question to be asked by a 12-year-old who's saying that, is this going to be my future? So my stories try to reflect on what children see the climate issue as, and how they are the ones who are taking charge and saying, no, we are not going to let this happen to our future, and you adults are responsible. You have to do something. We have homework to do. So you all need to do something. So a lot of my stories are around that. And as an editor, I'm also trying to work with writers to try and get them to write more climate stories now.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's really, yeah. I mean, and I mean, I feel so fortunate in a way because all of you are sort of leading your questions one to the other. So I really feel like I didn't even have to sit here. I mean, you could have just passed on the mic and it could have worked. And so I'm going to ask you, Kanishk, the ultimate question. What is it that you look for in a manuscript? But so just hold on. A manuscript from from an unknown author, first-time author. I mean, age. I'm not talking about young or old, but first-time manuscript. So because I'm sure you receive like tons of manuscripts, right? You receive a lot of manuscripts.
You know, to be very honest, for the first 6 or 7 years, we relied a lot on unsolicited submissions, which is these blind submissions. Uh, yes, so we look at everything, we look at everything. I mean, the authors should be very careful about, basic pitch hygiene, I mean, the pitch note should be very clear. It should not have like grammar issues. I mean, if they have written a book, if they spend so much time on a work of fiction, I'm pretty sure they know how to summarize the book, encapsulate it in like 400, 500 words, which speak to me, or the agent. And fiction is more of a subjective thing. I mean, it has to speak to me. There has to be some kind of originality, some edginess in the voice. It can be something absolutely new in terms of theme, or something done, an old theme with treated very differently. When it comes to non-fiction, credentials matter a lot. I mean, does the author have the right credentials to work on this book? I mean, which is why so many journalists publish works of non-fiction uh, on subjects they've been covering for the longest time as part of their jobs. And also historical works, works of ecology and all, you see credentials, I mean, the writing has to be strong, especially if it's literary non-fiction. But fiction is like an instinctive thing for me. And I do rely on a team of editors. So I respect their opinions. Sometimes we don't agree on, our assessment of a book. And then I have to take that call about whether or not to take it on. Uh, Credentials do matter for fiction writers, but only to a certain extent. It's good if a writer has published in journals, especially journals in the UK, US. We don't have too many magazines, literary magazines in India, but there was a time when Chandrahas Chaudhary was curating the fiction and poetry section of Caravan, and he discovered many good writers, from Tanuj Solanki to Sonal Kohli to Shehnaz Bashir. So I mean, and that really made a difference to both agents and editors. But I mean, your MFAs and all, they do matter to a certain extent. But fiction, it has to speak to you. I mean,
So you would take a look at an unsolicited manuscript that just
oh yeah,
lands
yeah.
up. There's a very
No,
high
no,
chance.
even now,
You do?
when I
Yeah.
rely a lot on recommendations, or my own authors recommending authors to me, like most of my fiction writers in the last 1 or 2 years have come through references, to be very
Yes,
honest. But then
yes.
there are unsolicited queries by very, very promising writers. So we look at everything, but it's very easy to, figure out from the first para of a pitch note whether or not a writer can write, So
Right.
but we
Okay.
look at
Yes.
everything,
But
yeah.
you do look.
Yes,
yeah,
if
so
it is promising, we will look at it. We will invite the full MS,
Yes.
and If we
Yeah.
like the full manuscript, we will make them an offer of representation. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I mean, that's very useful to know.
Also, we are very genre agnostic, which is why I have a massive range of books. I'm open to all genres, from uh, picture books to even academic books, business. I mean, just because I'm not interested in a subject doesn't mean that I will not like represent the book. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a business, and the advances and the earnings of the author are 1/10 or sometimes even 1/100th of what the authors make in the UK, US. So you can't be a specialist agent focusing on literary fiction, commercial, sci-fi, romance. It doesn't work that way.
Right, great. Yes, so, I mean, that's really, really useful because I think we all have these questions, especially for those of us who are sort of jumping across genres and things like that, right? So you really have like, can I send this manuscript in? And I think what you've told us today just lets us know that sometimes I think, because sometimes we feel that everything has to go through networks. And if you're outside, what do you do? But the sense I get from Kanishk's...
Oh yeah, we look at all unsolicited
yes, wow,
submissions.
yeah.
Or sometimes new writers even obsess over their pitches. They keep tweaking their pitch notes. They keep like Googling, and going on these writers groups and like try tweaking their pitch notes. So they should not even be that obsessive about
Right.
like their query letters or pitches.
Okay, right.
But we look at everything.
Right. Okay, so that's really great. Yeah, thanks. So again, moving back to, and this is a question that I think, unfortunately, Raman has probably answered many times, but I think but now that I see the seats filling up, I'm tempted to ask it yet again, which is that, are the youth reading at all? They have smartphones, they have social media. Do they go to bookshops?
Yes, the youth are going to the bookshops and they are asking for the most challenging books, and that's what makes me and my job, it makes me feel so gratifying that at seeing what I'm doing. Sometimes you pick a book which you see in the list, you bring it, and you just leave it on the table, and sure enough, they'll pick it, they'll buy it. A lot of people have forgotten to read, and they have been distracted by the gadgets. That is there, no doubt. But there are also this whole generation of youngsters, kids. And look at the diverse range of children's books that are coming out
That's
now.
true. That's
And it makes me so exciting it makes me so excited to open up the bundles myself to see each book. I mean, the excuse is to dust it, but to look inside. What art is there? What kind of theme does it have? So yes, the youngsters are reading, and they are reading more than what the elders should be reading. They haven't been reading at all, I
Yeah,
think.
because you hear this all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you,
it's
you
like,
hear
I
this all
mean,
the time, and this
yeah,
is the first time I've actually heard. And and we have to take Raman's word for it,
See,
right?
it's
Because
like a
he's out there.
shop talk, right?
You know-
The kid is running around, and the parents don't know what to do, so they come and want to talk to me. So are they reading? Oh, I forgot my glasses. So what I've done is I've even placed a pair of reading glasses there, so that you can't make an excuse that you left your reading glasses behind. So Kanishka.
My only concern is that they may be reading, but they tend to read, bestsellers, mostly international writers. I mean, during the pandemic also, a lot of people, including children, turned to reading, but they were reading old classics, like big books. So what the pandemic has done, it has made big writers bigger, and like new writers, like so, somewhat insignificant, to be very honest. So we have not been able to grow readership for new writers, especially literary fiction writers. Because they used to sell 2,000, 3,000 copies even in 2000, and now 21 years down the line, despite all these fancy prizes and lit fests and whatnot, they are still selling the same numbers. So the readership is
That's right, but
Yeah.
there's
growing,
also
but it's growing. It's not growing in the right way.
No, but I'd really- yeah, but I'd really
it
like
all
to hear.
depends on where they are buying. If they are coming to me, I have a very simple filter in place. If it's popular fiction, there's a filter. If it's much talked about, and if there are certain writers whom I don't want to name, but if it comes from that house or from those writers, right now curation has become such a thing in a bookshop that it's once you know what you want to keep out, the books that come in are all brilliant, and that's how I curate.
I'm talking about readership in general, because even during pandemic, the indie bookstores such as Rachna, they have
Yeah.
done very well.
Yeah,
you know,
because, I mean,
you have a
yeah.
USP, all of you, like whether it's Rachna or whether it's bookshop in Jorbagh or whether it's
So basically, so what
Champaka. Look at the kind
yeah,
of things
yeah.
Champaka is doing.
Yeah. So the sense, I mean, I think the sense I get of what you're saying is that where you have a strong bookshop, then all kinds of odds and ends like literary fiction and science fiction and other books like that are still selling. But where you are only left perhaps to online, is that what it is?
I'm
Where
talking
online
about the
sales?
sales of books in general.
In general.
Yeah.
Okay, so somewhere, so where you have a dedicated bookshop, perhaps people are still getting the support needed to reach out to all kinds of books, yeah? But somewhere it's not showing up in the larger picture. I hate the
In the
larger
overall
picture.
sales, in the overall
Yes.
sales, he
It's
might
not
be
showing,
selling
yeah.
like lots of
So-
works of literary fiction, but if you see the overall sales of a
Yes.
work of literary fiction, especially by new writers, even writers who won like major awards, Indian or South Asian awards, it doesn't reflect.
Yes.
I mean, that
See, these
that well.
changes, I think it should happen. Like I say, I mean, every neighborhood, every lane should have a library, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, these little changes have to happen from these bookstores. And I think with the founding of that Independent Bookshops Association, we also find a lot of support and thing from each other. I think,
Yes.
but what you're saying is right. The reading has grown; it's still vast, and
grown.
there's only
Yes.
so much one can cover as a bookstore.
Yes, also, we made in the earlier panel today, we actually opened this out also because we are in this beautiful environment here. And many of us aren't, even those of us who've come from northeastern cities, we no longer have this kind of space. And so, what I'm saying, and so one of the things we spoke about was that it's like bookshops, playgrounds, the parks, all of this, I think maybe it's a part of a particular ecology that we aspire to, and that in some places the pandemic has sort of like put even more stress. I mean, I think there's more stress on that. So you have the larger picture. So you have small islands where the books are selling, and we have a readership, and perhaps it's not being reflected in the larger picture. Yeah.
Like, the sales have not gone up that much, and that dates back to like pre-COVID times also. And this whole obsession with following Booker winners, Pulitzer winners. So I mean, if a book if a book wins the Booker Prize, it will be Amazon top 50 like for weeks. Not just the Booker Prize, but the International Man Booker Prize, which is given to translations. But if a book wins a major Indian prize, it will not be even in the top 5,000. So it's just that we need to find the right influencers, and nobody knows what the secret sauce is right now.
So what is it about children's books? Have you found a secret source of making sure books sell? Because he talks about all these packages of lovely children's books coming in. So what would you say?
So actually, I wanted to say something additionally to what we were talking about books and the publishing in the pandemic. We had a slightly different story at Pratham Books. So as the lockdown started, our warehouse shut. We could no longer ship out books, which meant we were not making many sales. But we have this online open source platform where we have thousands of stories up there in multiple indigenous, local, international languages. And I want to tell you that it was something quite to just watch, because all of us were at home at our laptops and we were just tracking. And across the world, people started turning to our platform in ways that we never imagined. So Italy, where the first wave was really intense, used to have something like 900 impressions of reading stories in January. In March, it went up immediately to 15,000 impressions. And that's what people started doing because they didn't have access to books. So they just started going online. They started telling their own stories about the virus. They started translating as many of our stories into their languages. And it was quite something to just watch how so many people were turning to stories at a time when you didn't know what else to turn to.
Yes. So I think, I've got my little chit here. So I think what could be interesting is we open it out for questions, and then maybe we can have final comments, right? Is that good? So are there any questions?
I go first? I think there's one more. Hello. Um, More than question, I have like a suggestion to Ajita, Bejal, the children's writer. So I really resonated with your concept about children's book because I myself am a folk artist, and when you said you have a certain connection with the environment, it resonated more with me. So I would like to share an idea that in Meghalaya we have folk stories and folklores, and they have a certain connection with nature. I think you could consider the idea of a children's folklore. You can take it from like Kasi or Aceh. Like, would you consider it?
Meet me after the panel with your portfolio.
Thank you.
I have a question for all the publishing people here. Can you hear me? Yeah. Um, this is a constant, the publishing industry in the, where the gateholders are in Delhi. That and all of the big festivals. There is no South publishing scene, no, it's not categorized like that. No West, no East, no North. And yet there is constantly Northeast writing as if we're some generic hold. And, I would really like to address that and address it to each of you with a request that can you look at it differently? Can we just be the writers? It doesn't need to be Northeast. And any thoughts on that, please?
Mary, I think it's something that we've been talking about, that we do need to change the lexicon when we talk about creators, because I think and I know we're all guilty of doing that, and we've done that for the sake of definition on this panel. But yes, we need to stop othering with the use of words which talks about, because if we're going to do that for certain communities, then we've got to use it for everybody. So I completely agree with you on that one, and thank you for checking on that, and I'm going to make sure I do that.
Yeah. So this is like I would say continuation of the session which was also in the morning, where some of you were also there. And that time I had this question, I didn't get the opportunity, so I'm just going to ask now. So we have been talking a lot about publishers and readers, their quality, their quantity and all. I'm very interested to know what do you think, because all of you are in publishing business or book selling business, or at least you read a lot, because some of you curate books also. What is the situation about the quality of the writers these days?
Uh, Lots and lots of good writers writing in many different new surprising genres, and we have very good writers writing science fiction, writing horror, historical, experimental poetry. So I mean, lots of good writing happening. The problem is how do we sell them to the readers? That's the major problem. But we do have some many promising books, and I personally feel that a lot of authors, Indian authors who should be published in the UK, US, who should be winning prizes, acclaim in the UK, US, Indian and South Asian, because I represent authors from Pakistan, Bangladesh. They don't get much attention. So I think lots and lots of exciting stuff happening. But it's not necessarily translating into sales. Not just sales, but even like buzz. Like
Uh, well, as a bookseller, it's always difficult to make that call about when you see a new book. But there is a lot of new writings happening, and it's just that we get bombarded with the same information about one famous author so many times that it gets it drowns in that noise, And we have to stay sharp all the time just to see what the premise of the book is. I mean, it's all about, again, going back to blurbs. All we do depend a lot on our gut instinct. When I hold a book in my hand, when I go to the publishers' warehouses, it's like I go to the. I mean, it's all you have is that book cover, how it feels in your hand. Would you like to read it? If yes, that's my book. I'll pick it up. So curation works that way too. But new writers, a lot of new writings are happening, and it's surprising that sometimes I discover it once it reaches my bookstore, and then you begin to push it. But yeah, the world is not fair, I guess.
Hello. So self-publishing has become quite popular nowadays, I've seen. So please explain to all of us here why an author should go through the traditional publishing route, or in what situation an author would consider self-publishing their book.
Self-publishing, the advantage of self-publishing is that the author controls the entire narrative, right from editing, the publishing timeline, the cover, the publishing timelines, how many copies he or she wants to put out, whether or not they want to do an ebook, audiobook. The biggest disadvantage of self-publishing is lack of credibility. Self-published books will not be taken seriously by the media. They will not be eligible for most of the prizes. I would say if a work of fiction or non-fiction is deeply personal and if it doesn't have a wider resonance, go ahead and self-publish. Do not even pitch it to publishers. But so there are two ways to self-publish. One is to go to self-publishing firms in India, such as Notion Press, and there are some other presses also, or to publish like a Kindle, which and in that case there will be no print edition. But self-publishing is problematic, but sometimes it's the only way out. There are several major publishing houses in India that have a customized publishing division. So you have to pay them to cover the cost, sometimes even over and above that, and then they publish your book under their regular imprint. So it will not seem as a self-published project, but in that case the costs are really, really high because they are effectively offering you their brand without believing in the book or without even seeing sales potential in the book.
I think the thing that distinguishes publishing and self-publishing is that when a house puts its weight behind a book, you have a dedicated sort of publicity team. You have someone you can reach out to who's a real person, and you can say that, what are you doing? Like, I haven't seen any reviews come out. Typically, publications tend to look at books that come from publishers, and we inundate them with books because there's so many of us, and we're publishing so much that typically journalists barely have time to even look at what we send them. So I think the biggest difference is publicity and distribution.
I have another
Credibility,
question.
sure, yeah. Editing, I mean, you can hire a freelance editor. I mean, those things are there in self-publishing. If you find a really good freelance editor, you would have an editorial hand.
There have been
in your work,
instances
but-
of authors self-publishing their first book and then selling so much that they end up getting like $1 million deals by publishers. You look at Amish, who, matlab, one out of like maybe 100,000 if you look at Amish, and Savi Sharma, they self-published their works or like partially self-published their works, and then the books started selling so much that they could not even handle the distribution. So which is when the publishers approached them and they took on the books.
So Raman, you're going to say
Yeah,
something.
just a quick thing. I mean, if you ever consider self-publishing, I mean, if you're a writer and if you think that self-publishing is the way out, don't be in a hurry to see your name in print. The number of likes you get on Facebook is not a way to judge how good your writing is. Always try to get hold of a good professional editor. After that, the book is out in the world. Once it's out, you are not in control. But while you are still in control, do a good job of it. I mean, I'm seen as I'm the friendly bookman, and they call me bookman. People approach me with their script and poetry all the time, and this is the one thing I tell them. They don't listen. They go ahead to Notion Press and publish it, and once the book comes in your hands, you will be the first one to be disappointed. Don't be in a hurry to see your name in print.
I have another question. So So you were talking about books that resonate with you so deeply that maybe you should just go ahead and self-publish in. Has there ever been instances where a book was so controversial that even though the subject matter did resonate with you, you did not feel confident in publishing it?
Um, I normally take on such books, but they get blocked at the publishing level, because all works of non-fiction, in fact, even some works of fiction, they undergo legal reads even before editors start working on them. So whenever a manuscript comes in, like a signed contract, because many of the contracts are signed on the basis of proposals, and when the manuscript comes in, it goes to the legal department for reviewing before it goes out to the editor for copy editing, and at that stage sometimes books get blocked. I mean, lawyers feel that publishers should not be publishing the book, that there'll be lawsuits, and that that there will be injunctions. But personally, I take them on, most of them, if there is merit to them. But I mean, I cannot like force a publisher to publish them.
So Ajita, maybe you can come in with.
Um, yeah, I mean, as long as your facts are true and and it can go through legal vetting and the lawyer will say that it's okay to publish this. It's not happened to me that I've turned down a book because I think that there will be um, political repercussions or someone will file a lawsuit unless it's a genuine there is defamation in the book or the footnotes are not authenticated. So those kinds of fact checks will need to be done. The hotter a book is politically, the more controversial it is, the harder our fact checks are, the harder our legal reads are. That is at least our process. That is our process.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just okay. Thank you so much for sitting through the chill, as the and listening to, and thank you so much, my fellow panelists, for really the scintillating conversation. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, panelists, for this insightful look into the world of publishing.